Hey everyone, it's Natalie Bencavanga. Welcome to another edition of Facts Over Fear. Now, you guys know on this show, I talk a lot about labor rights. I talk a lot about human rights, immigration. I mean, we cover it all. And today, we're going to be talking about something really interesting and I think very important. Um, Lehigh County here in Pennsylvania just did something that no one else in the country has yet done. But maybe it'll start a ripple effect. I don't know. We're going to talk a little bit about it. And it really starts with ICE. In a first of its kind policy, the Comptroller's Office is proposing a risk-based hiring standard for law enforcement. Under it, candidates with recent ICE experience don't just raise concerns, they actually fail both screening benchmarks based on training gaps and use of force data. We're going to learn exactly what that means. It's a stark conclusion that is driven by numbers. Now, federal data shows that ICE training falls below the national standards, which is terrifying, but we've really seen the fallout of that. Use of force data shows higher rates of potentially unjustified incidents, and the research is clear. Under stress, officers revert to what they learned first, not what they're taught later. So the question is, who and what are you really hiring? Because as County Controller of Lehigh County, Mark Pinsley, our guest today, puts it, you're not just hiring a resume, you're inheriting training, instincts, and culture. And ICE just doesn't cut it. So we're going to be breaking down this policy, the science behind it, and what it means for if other jurisdictions follow suit. Mark Pinsley, thank you so much for joining me, as always, here at Facts Over Fear.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm really excited to have this conversation because, when this came across my desk the other day, I had to read it a couple of times because I was like, wait a second, this is really interesting. So can you talk a little bit about what was the impetus for this being first in the nation to say, hey, ICE just doesn't meet the standard for law enforcement? That's interesting.
Yeah, interestingly enough, so we have a new executive in terms of Lehigh County who just came in. And so because of that, he's going through a lot of the process and procedures that the county is putting forth, one of them being human resources. And when I realized that that was coming up, I wanted to make sure that we took a look at specifically our hiring practices around anything that might create additional risk. And obviously at the moment, ICE agents create an additional risk should you hire them. And so that's really what sort of started my thinking about it. And I wanted to be fair. So when you read the report,
Sure.
You'll see that it's, very numbers focused, as you mentioned. So it doesn't really target ICE agents. It just happens to be that in my mind, quite honestly, that's what started my own questioning about it. And then secondarily, they fail. They just fail.
And that to me is actually very terrifying. I mean, obviously, we have this strong anecdotal evidence to show that failure on many fronts, right? We've seen the abuse of power. We've seen them using force when it wasn't necessary. We've seen them murder people in daylight. We've seen them use all kinds of weapons on American citizens, on our friends and neighbors, that really there was no reason to. And so when you see the militarization of ICE, but then you see the lack of training and the lack of care and how they continue to sort of strip away what needs to be done before they go out into the field, how does that compare to how law enforcement in Lehigh County is currently trained? What is that gap?
Oh, I mean, the gap's significant. It's hundreds of hours of difference. And some of it is really based on Trump, right? Like, so the training that ICE had previously was higher. I mean, some people will say that he only needs 47 days of training because he's the 47th president, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's sort of where it came from. It is done in hours and hundreds of hours, but the fact of the matter is that, I mean, ICE really has a twofold problem. One is that they're undertrained. I mean, look, they're in TSA now. They're acting as TSA agents. How much training did they get to be TSA agents?
Right. Zero.
Right. Yeah.
On the job training, Mark.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of the same thing. With all of their training, but then also the culture. I mean, that's probably the thing that worries me the most, because you could easily say, okay, if they only got, let's say, 100 hours of training and they needed 200 just for easy numbers.
Sure.
Well, you can train them for 200 hours, right? And that's not a problem. The problem is more so the culture in my mind. I mean, what ends up happening there is I don't know if you've seen the ads trying to hire ICE agents,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but they are very white nationalistic ads,
Yes.
also very, very male ads.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like that's a culture you're coming into,
Yeah.
especially if that was the ad that like inspired you to get in. Who
Oh,
are you? Right?
that part. Yeah.
Yeah.
If
And
you're
like you can't untrain that. And like some of those people, that's who they are. They were enticed by that ad in the first place. It's funny because I was talking to somebody yesterday and they were saying, "Oh yeah, I'm getting these ads, and they were saying, it's like it's hard, it's $50,000 bonus, blah blah blah." I'm like, "Why are you getting those ads?" Like,
mm,
like
what's your algorithm set up for, my friend?
because I don't get those ads.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, I think this sort of starts to tease apart the issue with how police are trained too, because I think for a long time in many marginalized communities and under-resourced neighborhoods, there has been this feeling of the police haven't really been a community asset either. So when we're talking about culture in general, how do we improve the culture for law enforcement in that sense? Because clearly, like you said, if ICE is being, pulled in through this white nationalistic lens, I mean, you could say sort of the same thing in some ways. Maybe it's a little more hidden, but police historically also have sort of worked through that framework.
Yeah, what I would say is that it starts from the top, right? Like, so
Mm-hmm.
different police forces are completely different. So the police
Mm-hmm.
force where I live, South Whitehall, I don't feel that way at all.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas other police forces I've gone in, I've seen that same tendency. And it really does come down to who's at the top.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, in Allentown, for example, one of the things that I had recommended, I think it's like 4 years ago now, was that there's a model called Cahoots, which is out of Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
And basically, if somebody is experiencing, some kind of mental issue and they're out in the streets,
Mhm.
rather than sending police officers, they send mental health experts.
Yeah. I will tell you, as a former social worker, I totally believe that to be true because we are trained in how to de escalate if someone is cycling, if someone is having a crisis. And I worked in a lot of different neighborhoods and a lot of different circumstances, and I never needed a weapon to be able to work in any of those communities. And so I think there is something to be said for that.
Yeah, and like, look, at the end of the day, that comes down to someone like the police chief saying yes.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And I've dealt with the police chief or the old police chief in Allentown. He's not there any longer. And we tried to get this through. We tried to get the idea of, a social worker showing up. And he was against it. And eventually they had ride alongs, so you might
Hmm.
go into a car with a police officer and maybe you'll be there. But part of the problem is, and you probably know this better than most, which is if you show up somewhere and you don't have a weapon and you don't look like a cop, they are willing to talk to you.
Yeah.
And as soon as the cop shows up, it escalates, the person runs, whatever
Yep.
happens, they're not going to trust that person
Yes.
because like look, if you're high or if you've got drugs,
Hmm.
you don't have any obligation to
Right.
arrest that person,
No.
whereas a police officer does,
Right. And
right?
exactly, it's setting these different standards. It's a standard of care versus sort of the standard of punishment, and when is which really necessary and needed. Um, you've been very clear in what you were working on with this executive summary around this concept that this is very much grounded in data as it refers to ICE not meeting the standards to be able to join the police force, meaning recent ICE agents, right? We're talking about
Yeah.
2025 and beyond. What does the research actually say about retraining? Does it actually
So
work?
base Yeah, so basically no.
Mm.
I mean part of it is dependent on the individual obviously,
Hmm.
but a lot of it comes out of the culture that you're in.
Right.
And if you come into a culture that is very white nationalistic, it's very difficult. And that's just one example. It could be any kind of culture, quite
Sure.
honestly.
Well,
It's
this is the
very
one we're dealing with right now.
right,
This is the
exactly.
problem culture we're dealing with. So just being real.
Yeah, being real, like it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to remove that. And from a county perspective, what I look at is I said, okay, look, the two major areas where that person might be hired, one is as a sheriff, and the second one is as a correction officer, and even more likely as a correction officer where the person may be forced to use force,
Mm.
right? They're in bad situations on a regular basis. So let's say something goes wrong and there's an overuse of force, and the person that ends up doing that was formerly an ICE officer. What kind of monetary risk did we just put the county in?
Mm.
It's not going to be good. It's not going to be good.
That's right. Wow. And I think that's a totally fair point that this comes back to make it make sense, CENTS as well, because you're
Yes.
becoming a liability at that point. I just wanted to share a comment from Phyllis Carlin from Miami. They say, "What a great idea from Lehigh County. Unfortunately, my family is no longer in Allentown after my dad passed, but he would have been proud to support such an enlightened and rational policy." And I think that's
Well,
really
thank you.
yeah, I think that's what this really comes down to. See, Mark, not all the comments are always negative. I mean, that's every now and then I get a nice one. So thank you,
Yeah, it's
Phyllis.
nice, right?
And let's pick that thread a little bit too about this accountability and liability. Can you talk a little bit more about what that means for the county?
Yeah, so normally what would happen, I mean, you see this, I mean, like the report kind of spells this out.
Mhm.
Normally, you'll see use of force in police. That's the easiest area to look at. And what ends up happening, of course, is police get into an altercation or there's a death. And what ends up happening is that there's a lawsuit that ends up happening.
Sure.
And sometimes the police settle before it goes too far because there's a cost benefit that you're weighing, right? Which is it's going to cost us $1 million to fight against this, or we can pay $10,000 now, right?
Hmm.
And the police do. And in Pennsylvania, the typical payout is just under $1 million. I think nationwide it was over 3 million. But a
Wow.
million dollars, it's a lot of money. It's a
Yeah.
lot of money, and that's going to be taxpayer dollars.
Yeah.
Right? So if it's a corrections officer and the corrections officer does something inappropriate, uh, hurts someone, anything like that, there's going to be a lawsuit. Guaranteed there's going to be a lawsuit.
Yeah.
And the first question is like, are we going to fight it? That'll be question number one. Are we going to pay out something? And let's assume we do fight it. Are we going to win? And then what's the average payout going to be? It's going to be close to $1 million,
Wow.
right? And so that's what you're going to have to think about each time. And so I'm not saying that this can't happen with a non-ICE former ICE agent,
Hmm.
but certainly you're putting yourself at greater risk because I know if I'm on the legal side, I'm going to go after that all day long.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that makes
Right.
total sense. And let's expand that framework a little bit as we wrap this up. And if you're just joining us, I'm Natalie Bencavanga. I'm here with Mark Pinsley, Lehigh County Controller. He's also running for state senate, so we might have another chat down the road here to talk about why he's running and his platform. But this one is really focused on what's going on with ICE and law enforcement. So if we're expanding that platform beyond, or excuse me, that framework beyond just the financial concerns, this is all about liability, as you said, but it's also about public safety and trust. So can you talk a little
Yes.
bit more about what is at risk if the counties and the cities around the country don't employ this framework? Because I think everybody should be looking at what Lehigh County is doing right now across the nation.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think, I mean, first off, look, what I think the outcome would be if we could get more people to do this, if we can get more, government agencies to do something like this as well as others, I think that it would force the people that are, like applying for these jobs to think twice,
Yeah.
right? And to some extent, I think that that's what we want is that if you're going to join an agency like that, at least know what you're joining,
Hmm.
and you're going to be joining something that people are not going to look kindly on later. So you might get your $50,000 bonus today. And I don't begrudge you for that, by the way. Like I
Mm.
think that like some of these people need money.
Mm.
That's why they're doing this. And unemployment is going up. Um, but there are some jobs that you really should be very considerate about before you take,
Yeah.
right? And I think that this is one of them because it may well tarnish your future ability to work.
I agree. And I think the larger sort of, if we're looking at this from a real systemic lens, is why are people in such financial straits? What are the
Yep.
systems that are being upheld that are oppressing people financially, that are causing them to be in a situation where they may be making decisions, like you said, for a short-term gain, but that could harm them in the long term, not just financially, but spiritually, morally, relationally. I know people that have completely cut off friends and relatives because they've joined ICE. It's an isolating experience, to kind of be the person that nobody wants around. So I think all of those things people have to be thinking about. One more comment from Phyllis. My background, among other factors, a former assistant county attorney defending the county in workers' compensation cases, and also a former insurance agent attorney. Mr. Pinsley, you are great. Oh, look at this, Mark. You've got
Thank
a
you.
you've got a fan in Phyllis. I love this. As we
Thank you,
wrap this
Phyllis.
as we wrap this up, what do you want to say to other county controllers, other community leaders who might be taking a look at what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually that's what I want them to do is to please take a
Mhm.
look at what we've done. Make
Mhm.
your own determination as to, whether it's right for you. But at the end of the day, this is about risk. It is about
Yeah.
money. If you're in that business, you should at least read the report, and make your own determination. And then quite honestly, so maybe it's not exactly as I put it out for your community, but I'll
Mhm.
bet it's something close.
Mm. I think that's a fair point too. This isn't a one size fits all situation, but there could be pieces of this that could fit any community and should at least be considered as a compassionate and common sense policy moving forward. And as always, everyone, until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Thanks again, Mark.
Yep. Bye bye.